All right, so welcome to the Brio webinar where Chelsea and I are going to talk about how one of the values of Brio is women and men's voices and really seeing and valuing both and the importance of that. I'm going to ask Chelsea if you could kick us off here on the topic, and we're going to bounce back and forth. At the end, we'll have some Q&A, so you'll probably see some other faces on here. But Chelsea, I'd love to hear your opening thoughts on this topic, which is something you and I are both really passionate about.
Absolutely. Yeah. So I'm really excited to talk about this because this is a topic that is near and dear to my heart. I'm very passionate about it. And it's something that I've even been, for those of you who know me, like going through currently of trying to find that voice and trying to include other voices. And I love everyone who's here today too for this discussion because I feel like we have a pretty good mixture of people and perspectives. And so I'm super excited. Um, One of the things that Mike and I kind of discussed earlier is that a lot of times we think we're including multiple voices when maybe subconsciously we're not actually doing that. So excluding people isn't necessarily a conscious thing that we do. It's more of like a subconscious level thinking that we do in terms of really things that we're used to, whether it's things we've learned in the church or things we learned in our family growing up. But so just kind of try to get in that mindset and open your mind a little bit to the things we're going to be talking about, that like maybe these are some things that we subconsciously do and we don't even realize it.
Yeah, I think that's so important. Chelsea, you and I, in talking about that earlier, I don't think, just in my conversations with people who are working with churches or even a part of churches, that most people, I don't think most people are intentionally leaving people out. And so to back what Chelsea's saying, I think when we don't value all voices, we are unaware that we're not valuing all voices. So there is a possibility and potential that anyone viewing this, you could have people that are part of what you're doing that are sort of invisible to you, that you're not noticing, that are made in the image of God, filled with the Holy Spirit, empowered, gifted, and you just haven't noticed or unleashed these people into their potential. And I don't think most of the time that it's malicious, but I do think that it's done on a subconscious level. I think that it's oftentimes done accidentally. And if we believe in the priesthood of all believers, and now I'm speaking of just the women piece here, you can't sideline 50% of the team. I really feel like that's an important note as we get rolling here.
Absolutely. And I think sometimes too, and this is kind of when you're used to being excluded, I think sometimes we take ourselves out of the game too, of like, well, I'm not being recognized, so I'm not even gonna try. No one values what I'm doing. But I think in doing that, not only are we taking ourselves out of the game, but we're actually kind of actively excluding those people that we could be reaching out to, the people on the outliers that maybe feel the same way, that just need someone to recognize and call out those giftings that God has given in to them in them, or empowering them to speak out, empowering them to do something, not necessarily in a church setting, but even if it's just in the community, and just learning how to come alongside them in that. um, so I think including other people's and not excluding ourselves sometimes, even when we feel like we've been excluded ourselves, is a big piece of that inclusion part. Mike, I know that's something we didn't talk about earlier, but that's something that I was realizing as I was like hearing you talk. I was like, there's been a lot of times where I've just been like, I'm not included, so I'm just going to take a step back and do my own thing. rather than taking a step forward and looking at those areas that God really wants to utilize us in. Especially, I think sometimes when you're excluded, it's almost like you fight so hard to be included in that specific circle and be recognized that you actually miss what you're actually supposed to be doing in that same setting. I don't know. What do you think, Mike?
Yeah, I think it's true. I think that a big part of the conversation is that if many people say I am inclusive because they're not actively putting up a stop sign to someone else. They're not saying no. So they think they're including people just by the fact that they're not denying them. However, there are a lot of people that will not step out. They don't feel like they have permission. They're allowed, they're able to. And so we can't, I think, include everyone, all voices, really activate the priesthood of all believers passively. I don't think it's going to happen passively. We've got to seek out, encourage, and ask people to step into their gifting and calling, and then help them discover ways that they can do that. But yeah, I think just simply saying I've never said no to anyone. I don't know that that's going to get the job done. We've got to seek people out like Jesus did, and then whisper to them like, you do have potential, and I do see your gifts, and you are known and loved, and I want you to step into your calling, and then help them imagine what that could look like in their context.
And I think a big part too in both those pieces, and including other people kind of from being in a leadership position, and then also including other people wherever you're at, is we've got to let go of the titles, man. We got to stop working for the titles. We've got to stop working for the recognition, or I'm a pastor so I can do this. We've got to start really seeking God on what we're supposed to be doing it. And if you have the title, that's not necessarily a bad thing either. That's not what I'm saying. But what's the reason behind why we want the title? Is it so you can actually empower other people and look for those outliers and be on an equal playing field with them, or actually pushing them above yourself? Or is it simply to say, I'm qualified so I can do this, and I'm now the one who says you're qualified or not? Because if we have that type of mentality, that's not Christ. He never once did that. He never once said he's the qualified one and he's going to point out the people who are. He simply said he wanted to be in relationship with people. And so I think we've got to stop working for the titles on both ends of the spectrum. We've got to just do what God says and see where he leads us from there.
Well, taking that even a step further, Chelsey, Jesus chose the, the most unexpected people to carry out his mission. And not only that, but then you see Paul saying that God chooses the foolish things of the world to shame the wise, right? And so I think this idea of um, leadership is one of the first things that comes up in people's heads when they think about male and female. They think about over. They think about authority, over, under, and authority. And women should not be an authority over men. And so this sort of like leadership above, below, up, down kind of stuff. But I think it's a really interesting and critical topic that we think about Jesus's whole posture and the way that he reacted toward leadership or authority or power or position. That we see Jesus said, I did not come to be served, but to serve, right? You see Jesus as not climbing up the ladder, but down the ladder, that he gave up, that he laid aside his divine attributes, right? That he said the greatest will be the least and the least will be the greatest. And so you see Jesus is redefining leadership as serving under, not lording over. And so he says things like, don't lord over like the Gentiles, and don't seek these idols. And in fact, he has these woes or sort of damn yous to the Pharisees. Woe to you, which is like a damn you to the Pharisees. And he lays this stuff out. And right at the beginning of it, he talks about call no one master, call no one teacher, call no one. And so you see, Jesus is constantly redefining this positional above thing and sort of saying anyone who wants to influence people and expand my kingdom and be about my mission should be thinking about how do I get under people, serve them. Anyone can pull out a basin, right? And wash the feet of others. In fact, it was some women who did that with Jesus, right? And then turn around and Jesus did it. Then you had a great reflection on that earlier, Chelsey. You want to go into that?
Sure. Are
The
you talking
woman
about
who
the one
washed
with
Jesus'
Mary?
feet? Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So, on this topic, when Mike and I were talking earlier, I thought it was so interesting because when Mary went and washes Jesus' feet, no one saw her. Like people saw her, saw the action, and thought it was despicable because of who she was. But Jesus used his position to actually uplift what she was doing and used her an example of, how they should be treating him. But when Jesus watched the disciples' feet, everyone saw him. And everyone wanted to know why or push against it. So, are we using position or whatever that my moment might be to really uplift the people who are going unseen, but doing exactly what they're supposed to be doing in the kingdom? Having that profound relationship with the Father that we should all have, that might be even looked down upon because it doesn't fit the norm or the mold that we think it should. Are we looking for those people so that we can truly like uplift and empower and use them as an example to others of this is what they're doing is right. um
Yeah, it's interesting, Chelsey. I don't think that I don't think that we should believe just in the priesthood of male believers, but I think we should believe in the priesthood of all believers. And when you think about the language of women not being over men, we also see Jesus talking about men not being over men and not overlording like the Gentiles do, but serving under, and a husband also serving his wife, and a wife serving her husband. And you've got this constant posture of submission and humility and working together where Jesus is our Lord, who's over us, right? And so I find it to be incredibly beautiful. And then I see this. Well, we can get into leadership structure another time, or maybe even later in the conversation. But I think another piece of the dialogue here is just APEST. That so many people are stuck in their imagination to they think about their church and they think about ministry through the lens of women's ministry, children's ministry, um, youth ministry, program on a Tuesday night in a church building, and they fail to really sort of see the world through the missionary pioneer lens of every believer filled with the Holy Spirit, sent by Jesus, as the Father sent me, I send you on mission. We don't start with church or church structures or how do we help people understand their calling from within our system. We see every believer as called and sent. As Spurgeon said, every Christian is either a missionary or an imposter. Every single one of us are sent ones of God out. So if you see yourself that way, there's this deeper calling thing that happens. So if you look at Ephesians 4, that talks about a pest. It's the only passage that talks about uh, calling or the gifting, calling. The language is actually for calling in Ephesians. The original language is for calling, but it says to each and every one of us in the original language. To each and every one of us are given these gifts, and that's written and read aloud to men, women, children, slaves. Each and every one of us are given these callings so that the church might attain into the fullness of Christ, that it would be mature, that it would represent the entire ministry of Jesus. And so then you have like Romans and First Corinthians that are how the Spirit empowers us to live out of those callings. So if you sort of look around, Chelsey, and you see different people as missionaries, and you go, man, I see, I'm just looking up in these windows. I see Megan. I'm just going to imagine that I know you way better, Megan. I just met you recently, but I say Megan is a daughter of God, and she is called by Jesus. And I can see in her that she is a real shepherd, and she represents, made in the image of God. She looks like Jesus in the way that she loves and shepherds and cares for people. And so, as she lives out her identity as a daughter of God and a missionary in her, now I don't remember what you do, but I'm just going to take Chelsey's job as working at a coffee shop, right? She loves these people, cares for these people, listens to their needs. She knows when to touch their arm and cry with them. She's just like such an incredible shepherd. And some of these people have come to faith. And now that some of these people have come to faith, as she sees herself as a daughter of God on the mission of Jesus, now there's a community forming in this coffee shop. And Megan is discipling these people because she's a missionary sent by Jesus, filled with the Spirit. He's empowering her. The Spirit is empowering Megan to shepherd these people through hospitality around a table, which is the same word for hospital. She's creating a place of healing around the table where people are coming to know Jesus and be liberated from whatever sort of sin or guilt or worthlessness or whatever they're plagued with. And now she's got some sort of church arising right there in the coffee shop where people are being discipled and coming to faith. And so I think part of the problem is that we start with not Jesus and then the mission of Jesus, which sends us out into Megan's coffee shop, where she lives into her identity or her calling as a daughter of God who is uniquely shepherdly, right? Caring for these people in this coffee shop, seeing then churches sort of spring up out of the harvest. Instead, you start with, I'm just going to pick on Aaron. We're going to picture that you got a bunch of programs, Aaron. You're like the program guru, right? And so then you look at Megan and you go, you know, Megan, I see that you have a desire to serve us. And so what I'd like you to do is meet with our elder team, and we'll see if we can place you into one of our positions, right? You see what that does to the priesthood of all believers. When Megan sees herself as a daughter of God, filled with the Spirit of God, sent as a missionary, she's living out of her calling wherever she's at. Disciples are being made, and different expressions of the church are formed. Now, as those expressions of the church multiply, well, then you have oversight or overseers so that you make sure that people are cared for and that you structure well for rapid multiplication and growth. Then you get into the topic of elders and all that kind of stuff. But to say that Megan cannot live out of her calling in that coffee shop as a daughter of God, Megan, I don't even know if you like coffee, but if she can't live out of that calling wherever she's at and make disciples, and that we don't give permission for her voice to be heard and shared and utilized, I think we're really missing out on so much that the Spirit of God wants to do. Right? where does your head go with all that, Chelsea? I rambled way too long. I talked about
No,
valuing
you're
male
totally
and
good.
female voices, and it's just Jarrell's voice right now. So you talk.
No, I love it. It reminds me of, so there's a quote that Mike said earlier too that I thought was so good. It said it was God gives gifts to the church, and those gifts are people. And like he was talking about, I think so often we see the church first in the terms of like, I'm working for this position or I need this status in the church so that I can do ministry in the community with people. And when we don't have that, we think we can't do the ministry until that happens. But that's not true. Just like Mike was saying, we should be doing these things already. First, because of our relationship with Christ, right? But then second, because we're seeing the people. And then it's church that develops out of that. All too often, like Mike was saying, we flip church and mission where we have our relationship with Christ. So we want to be involved or do something in the church, which leads to reaching the people. But if we swap that, church happens automatically no matter where you are. Like he was saying, if it happens in a coffee shop, great. If it happens in a Bible study, awesome. But church is going to be popping up wherever you are simply because you see the people rather than trying to bring the people to something that you've already structured and formed. Um,
Mm.
I think that's where there's been so many mega churches who are now trying to plug people into a lot of smaller pockets because they realize the value that's created, or community, I should say, rather than value, community that's created from having small numbers together rather than trying to hoard a bunch of people, or if we see the people as gifts, hoard those gifts. And then you're like, all right, we have all these things, but what do we do with them? If we think with the mentality of how do we gather people, how do we see the people first, then the community aspect is going to happen automatically.
Yeah. So I think you mentioned something really great, Chelsea, in that it's not that the church has mission or has a mission. It's that the mission of God has a bunch of churches, right? Where the mission of God results in all sort of different expressions of church. So the church in Chloe's house, and the church in Ephesus, and the church across a region, and the church across the world. And so it's as small as two or three and as large as every believer on the planet. When we start to think about church as resulting out of mission, right? It's not that we start churches and then make disciples. You make disciples and then you have a church, right? Because a church springs up as the result of disciples being made and in community forming and these people centering their lives together around the mission of Jesus. Now, I think what you then went into with the megachurch thing, I think is a great conversation about valuing all voices, which is what this conversation is about. How do you help every single person made in the image of God come to life, male and female, come to life and live into their calling? Well, I think megachurches are trying to figure that out too, which is why so many great leaders who are leading megachurches are saying, what we need to do is get all of our people into small groups. Why? Well, because you can't empower everybody's voice when there are 2,000 people in a room together, right? So we got to get all these people into smaller settings where they can be heard and loved, where they can figure out how to love their community, where their gifts can be identified, and these people can start to walk these things out. What you end up with is a bunch of micro churches within a macro church, right? I mean, that's the goal, is that we really get every person to experience community and now be seen and their gifts used and them to live into their calling. So yeah, I think we're running into this container thing of we need environments, we need group sizes, and group sizes do matter if we want to figure out how to get everybody to play, how to get everybody's voice utilized. I mean, imagine if you look in a room, let's just pretend, how many Zoom windows do we have here? I got Loy, the Browns, there's two of you there. Chelsey, Jonathan, Megan, Nick and his wife, Scott, Sean, Tamara. Okay, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, maybe 13 of us, maybe 14. So 13, 14 of us. Let's say that 3 of you are just incredible at caring for each other and caring for the needs of the community. And you have this heart where you're just like, we need to love people, care for people. Let's just say, because Megan runs the coffee shop, right? We're just pretending again. Megan's running the coffee shop, and she's got this shepherdly heart, and so does Jonathan. He's just incredible shepherd, and uh, so is Brian. Okay, so the 3 of them caring for the rest of us, my goodness, they're going to do a great job. And Megan, Brian, Jonathan, they're going to listen to us, care for us. All of their voices are going to be utilized. Now, Chelsey, she has this passion for people who don't know Jesus. So does Scott. And so we're looking around at Chelsey and Scott and going, hey, Chelsey, Scott, can you help us figure out how to include people who are not a part of our community? We need your voice. Scott, Chelsey, we need your voice. Can you help us figure out how to include people who aren't a part of us? Or where are they hanging out? Where should we go? In what ways can we connect with them? Now Chelsey jumps in, she shares. Scott jumps in, he shares. Now they're together helping us shape, what the community looks like. They're living into their calling, they're sharing their passions, they're using their gifts so that the community can better reflect the ministry of Jesus. We need every voice utilized, right? We really do. And so it's not just a male female issue. It is every single person made in the image of God, filled with the Spirit of God, called by Jesus to go out and be sent. We want them to soar, right? I mean, that's our passion, isn't it, Chelsey?
Mm-hmm. There's a book that I love by Bob Goff called Always Love. I think that's what it's called. But he talks about that very thing, of calling out who people are in prayer, or just telling them who they are and recognizing those giftings. I think especially in the church, we have a tendency to look and point who they're not, or what's lacking, or what they need to work on, rather than who they already are in Christ. So I think when you do exactly what Mike was talking about, and you recognize people and their giftings, and you call that out and you pull them in, it gives them permission to have that voice that they've already been given by Christ themselves. And they might just need it to be pulled out, or we need them to shape whatever mission God has us on in the moment. So it's important to recognize them and pull them in. I just wanted to say, Tamara, I love your Facebook content that you always put. I feel like I know you, even though I don't even think I've spoken directly to you. So I just wanted to say thank you. You are such an encouragement. But that was just a little side note. And then also, I wanted to back up to something Mike said earlier about serving one another. It truly is such a circle of us just serving. It's so funny, even talking about men and female voices and the equality that needs to be there, because in my life, I've seen it, but I've never really recognized it as an issue until just recently, of being involved in ministry and such. And seeing the flip side, where people do try to actively oppress or suppress rather than bringing in all voices. To me, it's like, isn't this what the church should be anyway? So it's so weird going into it of like, this is what God is calling me to do, and then someone being like, oh no, but you can't, because your woman, or even indirectly. Like, no one really goes at it that directly anymore. I feel like it's much more indirect, of like, you just won't get invited to something, or they'll throw in a Bible verse, or just very subtly kind of turn the tables of why you can't do something. So I think that's why it's that much important to even recognize the outliers, man or woman, black or white, whatever it is, these outliers that have a different gifting and voice than you do, and maybe they even make you uncomfortable because of it. Are you willing to pull them in because you recognize that they're needed, because they're essential to the mission, because they see something differently than you do? And it's not because what they're doing is wrong, it's because God has gifted them in another way that you need to for your own mission. I think so many times we automatically label them as being broken or not as advanced as you are. They just haven't learned that aspect yet, when in reality, they actually know more about it than you do. And that's how God made the body. If we just needed a select few to run the church, the capital C church, we wouldn't even need a body. We would just need those. But God knew what was going to be needed. And for that unity to exist, we would need each other and diversity in our voices, rather than just having a select few. And like Mike was saying earlier, in terms of, he didn't even want a hierarchy among the disciples. What happened when the disciples were arguing among each other about who was the greatest? Jesus shut them down. He was like, no, that's not what this is about. It's not about being greater than one another. And that's where it truly is just a circle. We spend so much time trying to beat each other in this spiritual hierarchy that doesn't even exist. It's not even there, when it should be a circle of us helping one another, because I might be going this way and you might be going this way, but in order for the circle to continue, both aspects are needed. Um, there is something else I was thinking of in terms of.
And Chelsea, we learn from each other based
Mhm.
on people are called differently and more gifted in different ways than us. So there are times where I'm with my micro church and someone who is a better, because shepherding is my biggest weakness out of APEST. It really is. Um, so I'll have to look at my shepherds and go, how do we love these people well right now? What does that look like? And you have to defer and ask other people. And then they look at me and go, how do we start something new? Right? Because that's more my area of giftedness. I remember going with one of our shepherds to the hospital, and we're standing there with someone who got a rough diagnosis and they're sick, laying in bed. And I just didn't know what to say, Chelsea. I looked at him, I'm like, man, that stinks, right? Didn't know what to say. And the person that was with me just put their hand on this guy laying in the bed. They both started weeping together. And we left the hospital and I went, teach me how to do that. How do you teach me how to do that? And they just have this natural calling and giftedness, and you can see them growing and maturing in it, but we have to defer to each other, right? Learn from the teachers, let them teach you how to teach. Learn from your evangelists, let them teach you how to build relationships with people who don't know Jesus, and include them and pray for them. Anyway, I think we do a terrible job of situational leadership, and we feel like it all has to be very positional and title based instead of deferring to people in their callings and giftedness. I just wanted to affirm what you were saying there. I think it's good. And you also referenced Tamara, that she's a great example, Chelsea. Like, she is starting this yoga coffee gathering with people in the upstairs of this coffee shop, where they're gonna have yoga together. They're gonna do yoga together, and then afterwards they're gonna drink coffee. And when they drink coffee, Tamara's gonna drop like spiritual quotes into the conversation. and a lot of Bible quotes into the conversation just to get people talking about spiritual things. It's a lane for her to be on the mission of Jesus in this coffee shop, which is a great idea. And we're going, man, Tamara, as an evangelist that loves to gather people, you have permission, go try that, create that, pull people together and start to sprinkle some Jesus conversation into it. And let's see what the Spirit of God does. But you just pointed out a great example, and that's part of the culture of there's a person that can play. Let her play. She's making a difference. I love that. So, other thoughts you have? I hope I didn't cut you off there.
No, you didn't cut me off at all. No, I think that's amazing, Tamara. And I think that's what the church is supposed to be, of people being allowed to play in their settings. There's a quote, I don't have it with me. I love it. I'll have to send it to you guys after or something. But it says so often in the church, we want to remove people from the very settings in the community that they're actually supposed to be in. And if we actually believe in the good news of the gospel, it would propel us out of organized Christianity and into the dark places of our community, because those are the people we're actually supposed to be reaching. Those are the people we're actually supposed to be engaging with. And it's so funny. I love that, Tamara, so much. And I think even with yoga, we've done that, this whole nother topic in the church of like, oh no, you can't do that because of this reason. Yet here you are using it as a conversation starter that leads to coffee and conversation and community. But it starts with the relationship first. And you're doing things to develop those relationships in places that some other people wouldn't or can't go. So I love that so much.
Yeah, and I think in 2 minutes here, we'll open it up for everyone to ask some questions. We can dialogue with them. But I just want to make one more statement that I think we find really common when it comes to the missional world, and that is selective missionality. What I mean by that is we have a tendency to be on the mission of Jesus to people that are just like us. And so we have to sort of be aware of that. And what I mean by that is a lot of our micro church leaders that go out on mission, um, they get very locked into certain neighbors that might have kids around the same age, share the same sorts of hobbies and interests, and so they want to reach people that are just like them. And in the process, they overlook the other half of the neighborhood. There are people that live around them that they don't even notice or see. And they find that it's not like they're intentionally hating on anyone or not loving anyone or mistreating anyone. It's just that they simply ignore people that Jesus would have noticed. They reach out and zero in and focus on specific people, and in the process unintentionally exclude other people. And I think we naturally do that, and it could be male, female, where men connect with other men and reach out to other men and try to develop other men, and oftentimes don't include women, empower women, listen to their voices, give opportunity. And I think a lot of that is, like we said at the beginning, unconscious. It's not intentional. It's not malicious. It's just that we are unintentionally selective toward people that are like us. And I find that if the only people that I get together with or reach out to or try to be on mission to are like me, then maybe it's just that I like myself. Maybe I don't really love other people well. Maybe I'm more in love with myself. Maybe I need to look at my heart that the only people I'm interested in getting to know are people that are similar to me. And so I've got to do a check of my heart, my motivations. Like, God, why are there people that you would have noticed that I don't? Why are there people that you would have given attention and a voice to that I don't? And so I think we have to check our hearts and say, God, are there people? Are there women? Are there men Are there, people that are connected to our community, our church, our micro church, our house church, our, you know, Sunday gathering that I just I've never really paid attention to. I've had surface level conversations with. I don't even know how they're called or what their gifting is. It, not only are they not growing and mature in it, I don't even know what it is. So we've got to sort of figure out, how do we see these people and then help them to soar. I think it's very important. But why don't we now switch it over some Q&A here, and